If your blood sugar is highest in the morning, stop. Before you eat anything, just notice what's happening here. You went 7, maybe 8 hours without eating a single thing. No carbs, no sugar, nothing. And somehow your blood sugar went up. That doesn't make sense on the surface. And yet, it's happening to millions of people every single morning. People who are eating less, exercising more, cutting carbs, and still watching their numbers climb. Still waking up tired, still feeling like their body is working against them no matter what they do. And here's the part that almost nobody is talking about. In long-term research, people with higher levels of one specific mineral had up to a 71% lower risk of developing insulin resistance. Same food, same lifestyle, completely different metabolic outcome. And most people have never once considered this mineral as part of the picture. Most doctors don't test for it. Most health programs don't mention it. And yet the evidence has been building for decades. So if you've been doing everything right and still not seeing results, stay with me because what I'm about to share might be the piece you've been missing the entire time. And I want you to watch this all the way through because the most important part, the part that explains why nothing you've tried so far has fully worked, that comes at the end. I'm Dr. Megan Foster. I've spent over 2 decades working specifically in metabolic health and insulin resistance. I've worked with patients who have tried every diet, every supplement, every protocol, and still struggled. And over again, I kept seeing the same pattern, the same overlooked factor showing up in their blood work, in their symptoms, in their history, and it kept pointing to the same mineral. Before we go any further, I want to say something clearly, something that goes against a lot of what you've probably been told. Insulin resistance is not primarily caused by carbs. I know that sounds controversial, but hear me out. Carbs expose the problem. They don't create it. When a system is working properly, your body handles carbohydrates efficiently. It signals, it responds, it clears glucose from the blood, and you feel fine. The real issue is when your body loses the ability to do that, when the internal system that processes energy breaks down. And one of the most common, most overlooked reasons that breakdown happens is a mineral deficiency that most people are completely unaware of. Think back for a moment. There was probably a time in your life, maybe 10 years ago, maybe 20, when you could eat bread, rice, pasta, fruit, and nothing really happened. No crash afterward, no brain fog, no fatigue, no stubborn weight that wouldn't come off. No matter what you did, you felt fine. Your body just handled it. Now you eat those same foods and something feels off. Your energy drops, your focus disappears, you feel heavy and slow, and it seems like no matter how carefully you eat, your body just doesn't respond the same way it used to. That shift didn't happen randomly. And here's the most important thing I want you to hear right now. This is not just aging. This is not permanent. Your body didn't just decide to stop working. Something changed in the internal system that regulates how energy is processed and that something can be identified. And when you understand it, you can actually start to change the direction you're heading. Now, I want to ask you something before we get into the 5 mechanisms I'm walking you through today. Have you noticed your body reacting differently to carbohydrates than it used to? More fatigue after meals, more unpredictable energy, more of that afternoon crash where you just can't think straight. If that sounds like you, type yes in the comments right now. I think you'll be surprised how many people are in exactly the same situation. You are not alone in this, and more importantly, you are not stuck. Here's the simplest way I can explain what's happening in your body. Think of your body like a house with electricity running through it. Glucose is the energy coming in. It's the fuel. Insulin is the signal that tells your cells to open the door and let that fuel inside. But magnesium is the electricity that makes the entire system function. Without electricity, it doesn't matter how much fuel you have. It doesn't matter how strong the signal is. Nothing works the way it's supposed to. Without enough magnesium, the signal weakens, the doors don't open properly, the fuel builds up outside where it can't be used, and the body keeps sending more signals, more insulin, trying to force the system to respond. And over time, that cycle is exactly what we call insulin resistance. And this is not a fringe idea. This is supported by decades of research, long-term studies, clinical trials, observational studies across thousands of people. The evidence is consistent and significant. And in this video, I'm going to walk you through 5 of the most critical ways magnesium directly impacts insulin resistance and your metabolic health. We're going to go from the most foundational to the most important. And I promise you, by the time we get to number 1, you will understand something about your body that most people, including most people in the healthcare system, have never put together. So, let's start with number 5. Most people who hear the words insulin resistance assume it means one simple thing: too much insulin. And that's partially true, but it's more nuanced than that. And understanding the nuance is what actually helps you fix it. What happens in many cases of insulin resistance is not just too much insulin. It's that the signal itself stops being heard properly. Insulin is released. It travels through your bloodstream. It arrives at the cell, and the cell barely responds. Think about it like this. Imagine you're trying to open a door. You have the right key. The key fits in the lock, but the lock mechanism inside is jammed. The key is there. The signal is there, but the door just won't open. That's what's happening at the cellular level in insulin resistance. And magnesium is the oil that keeps that lock mechanism working. Here's the specific biology explained simply. When insulin arrives at a cell, it connects to a receptor, like a keyhole on the outside of the door. That connection triggers a chain reaction inside the cell that eventually opens special channels and lets glucose in. Magnesium is required for that chain reaction to happen properly. Without it, the reaction stalls. The chain doesn't complete. Glucose can't enter, and blood sugar stays elevated even though insulin is present. Multiple well-designed studies have shown that when people increase their magnesium intake, insulin sensitivity improves measurably, even without significant changes to diet, exercise, or other medications. That's not a small finding. That's telling us that the mineral itself is directly influencing how responsive cells are to insulin. It's telling us that for many people, the problem isn't what they're eating. It's that the mechanism that processes what they eat is impaired. And magnesium is one of the primary things that keeps that mechanism functioning. This is also why so many people who cut carbs feel better initially, but then plateau. They reduce the glucose load coming in, which temporarily reduces the strain on a broken system. But the system is still broken. The underlying signaling problem is still there. The lock is still jammed, and over time the body finds new ways to compensate, and symptoms come back because you never fix the actual problem. Now I want to briefly mention something about the research here because I think it's important for you to understand how solid this evidence actually is. This isn't based on one small study. A large analysis published in the journal Nutrients looked at people with metabolic syndrome over an extended period and found that the group with the highest magnesium intake had a 71% lower chance of developing insulin resistance compared to the group with the lowest intake. Another multi-dead study following over 4,000 people found significant associations between magnesium levels and lower rates of inflammation, better insulin function, and up to a 47% lower risk of developing type 2 diabetes. These are not small numbers. These are not coincidences. This is a consistent signal across thousands of people and decades of research pointing at the same mineral. And yet, most people have never been told this. Most people get diagnosed with prediabetes or insulin resistance, and the conversation immediately jumps to cutting carbs, losing weight, and sometimes medication. The foundation, the mineral that the entire system depends on, is almost never addressed. Which brings us to number 4. Your pancreas is one of the most important organs in this entire story. It's the organ responsible for producing and releasing insulin in the first place. And most people think of it as a simple on-off switch. Blood sugar goes up, pancreas releases insulin, done. But it's far more sophisticated than that. And magnesium is deeply involved in how well it works. Here's something that surprises most people. Your pancreas doesn't release insulin continuously. It releases it in pulses. Rhythmic bursts of insulin that are carefully timed and calibrated based on what's happening in your bloodstream. Those pulses are controlled by electrical signals inside the pancreatic cells. And those electrical signals depend heavily on specific minerals, including magnesium, to maintain their stability and rhythm. When magnesium levels are low, the electrical activity in pancreatic cells becomes less stable. The pulses become irregular, the timing gets off, and when that happens, two different problems can emerge. The first is under-release. The pancreas doesn't release enough insulin when glucose enters the blood, so blood sugar stays high longer than it should. The second is over-release. The pancreas overcompensates and releases too much insulin, causing blood sugar to drop too fast, which triggers hunger, cravings, and fatigue. Both of those patterns are harmful, and both are driven at least in part by the instability in pancreatic signaling that comes from low magnesium. This explains something that a lot of people experience but can't make sense of. They eat the same meal on Monday and feel completely fine. They eat the same meal on Wednesday and they crash hard afterward. Same food, same portion, totally different response. And they assume it's about the food. Maybe it was a bad batch of something. Maybe they should avoid that food from now on. But what's actually happening in many cases is that the pancreatic signaling was less stable on Wednesday. The electrical rhythm was off, the insulin release was poorly timed, and the body paid for it with a blood sugar spike or crash. Understanding that this instability exists and that it's connected to mineral status is enormously liberating because it means the unpredictability you've been experiencing isn't random. It's not about willpower. It's not about making better food choices. It's about a system that's operating without the mineral support it needs to stay consistent. And there's another dimension to this worth understanding. Over time, when the pancreas is repeatedly asked to manage an unstable system, when it's constantly over-releasing and under-releasing, constantly trying to compensate, it gets fatigued. Pancreatic function declines. The cells that produce insulin become less effective. And what started as insulin resistance can progress into something more serious over years and decades. This is the progression that nobody wants. And addressing the foundational mineral deficiencies early is one of the most powerful things you can do to slow or interrupt that progression. Now, let's talk about number 3. And this is the one that I think will resonate with the most people in this video because the symptom it causes is one of the most universally complained about experiences in modern health: fatigue. Not just ordinary tiredness, but a specific, frustrating, deeply persistent fatigue that sleep doesn't fix and rest doesn't resolve. Here's what's happening. Even when glucose is available, even when there's energy literally circulating in your bloodstream, your body still has to convert it into a usable form inside the cell. That conversion happens through a molecule called ATP. ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. But all you need to know is this: it is your body's internal energy currency. Every single function in your body, every muscle contraction, every thought, every heartbeat, every process in every cell runs on ATP. Without it, nothing works. And here's the critical connection that most people have never heard. Magnesium is required to activate ATP. It's not optional. It's not a supporting factor. It is structurally required. ATP in the body doesn't function in its raw form. It has to bind with magnesium to become biologically active. Scientists actually call this active form magnesium ATP. Without the magnesium, the ATP is essentially inert. It's there, but it can't do its job. So what happens when magnesium is low? You have glucose coming in, you have ATP being produced. But the ATP can't be activated properly. The energy conversion is inefficient. And the result is that your cells are starved of usable energy even when fuel is theoretically available. This is the physiology behind that specific kind of fatigue that so many people describe. The kind where you eat a full meal and feel more tired afterward, not less. The kind where you wake up after 8 hours of sleep and still feel exhausted. The kind where you have brain fog that rolls in mid-morning and doesn't lift. The kind where your body just feels heavy and slow and unresponsive, like you're running on a mostly empty battery no matter what you do. Some people describe it as feeling wired but tired. There's an underlying tension, maybe some anxiety, maybe some restlessness. But underneath that, there's a profound exhaustion that nothing seems to fix. That combination is very characteristic of a system that's producing stress hormones to try to compensate for low energy, because the body knows something is wrong while simultaneously not being able to produce energy efficiently, because the ATP pathway is compromised. And here's the part that keeps people stuck for years. They feel that fatigue, they feel the crashes, and they naturally assume the problem is the carbs because the crashes seem to happen after eating carbs. So they cut carbs and they feel a little better for a while. Maybe a few weeks, maybe a couple of months. But then the fatigue comes back because removing carbs reduced the demand on a broken system, but it didn't fix the system. The ATP pathway is still compromised. The energy conversion is still inefficient, and the body will find a way to make you feel that the fix isn't less fuel. The fix is restoring the system's ability to use the fuel it gets. Now, let's talk about something that connects two of the most commonly discussed topics in metabolic health and explains why so many people are wasting money on supplements that simply aren't doing what they're supposed to. This is number 2, and this is about vitamin D. If you follow health content at all, you've heard about vitamin D. You know it's important. You've probably been told your levels are low because vitamin D deficiency is extraordinarily common, affecting an estimated 1 billion people worldwide. You may have started taking a vitamin D supplement, and if you're like most people, you probably didn't feel dramatically different after a few weeks or months. Here's the explanation that nobody gives you. Your body cannot use vitamin D in the form you consume it or absorb it from sunlight. It exists in an inactive form before it can do anything. Before it can influence insulin sensitivity, immune function, bone health, or any of the dozens of processes it's involved in, it has to be converted, activated. And that activation process happens in 2 stages, first in the liver and then in the kidneys. And both of those conversion steps require magnesium as a coactor. A coactor is essentially an ingredient the process cannot happen without. So here's what happens when you take vitamin D, but you're low in magnesium. The vitamin D comes in, it goes to the liver. The enzyme that should convert it is waiting, but that enzyme requires magnesium to function. If magnesium isn't there in adequate amounts, the conversion is sluggish or incomplete. You end up with vitamin D sitting in an unusable form in your bloodstream. Your blood test might even show that your vitamin D levels are normal or improving, because the test measures total vitamin D, not activated vitamin D, but you're not feeling the benefit because the active usable form never got produced properly. And it goes further than that. There's actually a 2-way relationship between magnesium and vitamin D that creates a problematic cycle. When vitamin D is very low, the body tries to compensate in ways that increase the demand for magnesium, meaning low vitamin D makes you burn through magnesium faster, and low magnesium prevents vitamin D from activating. So you end up in a loop where both are low and each one is making the other worse. Clinical research has confirmed this relationship explicitly. Studies have shown that giving people magnesium alongside vitamin D produces significantly better outcomes than vitamin D alone. The vitamin D activates more completely. Insulin sensitivity improves more. Inflammation markers drop more because the 2 nutrients are working together the way they're supposed to. This has enormous practical implications. If you are taking vitamin D right now, risk cursant, and especially if you're not feeling a significant benefit from it, there's a very strong chance that low magnesium is the reason. You're not absorbing it wrong. You're not taking the wrong dose. You're missing the coactor that makes the whole process work. And this isn't just about vitamin D. Magnesium is a coactor in over 300 biochemical reactions in the human body. 300. That's not a minor supporting player. That's a foundational mineral that sits at the center of an enormous number of processes. Protein synthesis, DNA repair, blood pressure regulation, nerve function, muscle contraction, the list goes on and on. When magnesium is low, all of those processes are compromised to some degree, which is why the symptoms of magnesium deficiency are so varied and so often misattributed. Muscle cramps, headaches, difficulty sleeping, anxiety, heart palpitations, constipation, fatigue. All of those things in many cases trace back to the same deficiency. Understanding magnesium as a foundational mineral, not just a supplement you take for one specific thing, changes how you approach your health. It's not about taking more of everything. It's about making sure the foundation is solid so that everything else you do actually works. And this leads us directly into number one, the one that explains why people try magnesium and feel like it didn't work. The one that ties everything together. Here's a very common story I've heard from patients over the years. They learn about magnesium, they're excited. They start taking 400 milligrams a day. 2 weeks go by, 3 weeks, maybe a month, and they don't notice much. Energy is still inconsistent. Blood sugar is still unpredictable. Sleep is still not great. So they conclude that magnesium doesn't work for them, and they move on to the next thing. And this is one of the most costly mistakes in metabolic health. Not because magnesium doesn't work, but because they didn't understand that magnesium doesn't work alone. It works as part of a system. And if the rest of the system isn't in place, supplementing magnesium in isolation produces disappointing results. Here's what most people don't know. Your body's ability to retain and use magnesium depends significantly on two other minerals, sodium and potassium. These three minerals are part of the same electrolyte system. They influence each other's absorption, retention, and cellular function constantly. And when one of them is off, the others are affected. Let's start with sodium. Most people trying to improve their metabolic health are reducing sodium, cutting out processed foods, eating cleaner, sometimes following low-carb or ketogenic diets. And in many ways, those are positive changes. But here's the consequence that almost nobody warns you about. When sodium levels drop significantly, as they do on very low-carb diets or extended fasting, your kidneys respond by excreting more magnesium. The kidneys have a regulatory system that links sodium and magnesium retention. When one goes down, the other tends to follow. So, the very diets and lifestyle changes that people pursue to improve their metabolic health are simultaneously accelerating magnesium loss. You're eating cleaner, you're supplementing magnesium, and your kidneys are flushing it out faster than you can replace it. Now, potassium. Potassium and magnesium have an intimate relationship inside the cell. They work together to maintain what's called the membrane potential, the electrical charge that every cell maintains across its membrane. This charge is what allows cells to communicate to respond to signals to do their jobs. Magnesium helps regulate how potassium moves in and out of the cell. And when potassium is low, the cell's ability to use magnesium effectively is compromised. The two are so closely linked that in clinical medicine, it's nearly impossible to correct low potassium without also correcting low magnesium first. They restore together, or they don't restore at all. So think about what this means for someone who is eating a typical modern diet, especially a diet focused on cutting carbs or reducing calories. They are simultaneously losing magnesium through dietary insufficiency. They are losing magnesium through the kidneys because sodium is low. They are struggling to use the magnesium they do have because potassium is depleted. And then they supplement magnesium in isolation and wonder why nothing changes. The body is not a collection of individual nutrients, it's a system. And you cannot fix one part of a system in isolation when multiple parts are compromised. This is also why the symptoms of magnesium deficiency so often overlap with symptoms of potassium and sodium deficiency, muscle cramps, fatigue, heart rhythm irregularities, headaches, poor sleep. They share these symptoms because they share the same biological pathways. Addressing only one while ignoring the others leaves the system in a state of partial repair. Better in some ways, but still not functioning the way it should. Now, let me walk you through something that I think is one of the most fascinating and underappreciated aspects of magnesium deficiency, which is how it connects to chronic stress and the stress hormone cortisol. Because this explains something that a huge number of people experience, but can never quite explain. Cortisol is your primary stress hormone. When you're under stress, whether it's emotional stress, physical stress, poor sleep, or even the metabolic stress of unstable blood sugar, your adrenal glands release cortisol. And cortisol does several things in response to that stress. One of the things it does is trigger the release of magnesium from the cells. The magnesium moves into the bloodstream, and from there it gets excreted through the kidneys. So every time your body experiences a stress response, you lose magnesium. And here's where it becomes a vicious cycle. Low magnesium makes your stress response more sensitive. Research has shown that when magnesium is deficient, The adrenal glands release more cortisol in response to the same stressor. You react more strongly to stress, which causes you to lose more magnesium, which makes you react even more strongly to the next stressor. The cycle feeds itself. And here's the connection back to blood sugar and insulin resistance. Cortisol directly raises blood sugar. It's one of cortisol's primary functions. It mobilizes glucose from storage to give you energy to deal with the perceived threat. So if you're in a chronic cycle of low magnesium and elevated stress response, your cortisol is chronically elevated to some degree. And that chronically elevated cortisol is chronically pushing your blood sugar up, even while you sleep, which is exactly why so many people wake up with elevated morning blood sugar that they can't explain. This is the mechanism behind what doctors call the dawn phenomenon, the tendency for blood sugar to rise in the early morning hours even without eating. Cortisol naturally rises in the early morning to wake the body up, but in someone with low magnesium and a sensitized stress response, that cortisol surge is stronger than it should be. It releases more glucose and blood sugar climbs. Understanding this cycle, stress, cortisol, magnesium loss, more stress sensitivity, more cortisol, more blood sugar gives you a completely different view of what's happening. It's not just about diet. It's not just about carbs. It's about a hormonal and mineral system that has gotten into a feedback loop it can't break out of on its own. And magnesium is one of the most direct ways to interrupt that loop. When magnesium is restored, the stress response becomes less reactive. Cortisol output is better regulated. Blood sugar fluctuations smooth out. Sleep quality improves because cortisol at night is one of the most common reasons people can't sleep deeply. And the whole downstream cascade that disrupts insulin signaling begins to settle. Let me also talk about something that doesn't get enough attention, the gut connection. Because your gut plays a much larger role in insulin resistance and magnesium status than most people realize, your gut microbiome, the community of bacteria and other microorganisms living in your digestive system, directly influences how well you absorb nutrients, including magnesium. The state of your gut lining affects how efficiently minerals move from the food you eat into your bloodstream. And the bacteria in your gut produce compounds that influence insulin sensitivity, inflammation, and even how the pancreas functions. When the gut is inflamed, which is extremely common on modern diets high in processed foods, low in fiber, and disrupted by stress, magnesium absorption drops. The gut lining becomes less effective at pulling minerals from food. The bacteria that help with absorption become less active, and you end up in a situation where even if you're eating magnesium-rich foods, your body isn't absorbing them efficiently. This is one of the reasons why two people can eat very similar diets and have completely different magnesium status. One person has a healthier gut lining and microbiome and absorbs magnesium effectively. The other person has chronic gut inflammation and magnesium moves through without being fully absorbed. The diet looks the same on paper. The outcomes are completely different. Foods that support gut health, fermented foods like yogurt, kefir, and sauerkraut, prebiotic fibers found in garlic, onions, and bananas, and a diverse range of plant foods also tend to support better mineral absorption. And interestingly, magnesium itself plays a role in maintaining gut motility and gut lining health. So restoring magnesium and supporting gut health tend to reinforce each other, creating an upward spiral in the same way that deficiency creates a downward one. Now, let's talk about where magnesium actually comes from in food. Because one of the most important questions is, why are so many people deficient in the first place? If this mineral is so critical, why aren't people getting enough of it from their diet? The answer has several layers. The first is soil depletion. Over the past several decades, intensive agricultural practices have significantly reduced the mineral content of the soil where our food is grown. Studies comparing the nutritional content of fruits and vegetables today versus 50 years ago have found substantial reductions in magnesium and other minerals. The food looks the same, but the mineral content is meaningfully lower. The second reason is the modern diet itself. The foods richest in magnesium. Dark leafy greens like spinach and Swiss chard, pumpkin seeds, almonds, cashews, black beans, edamame, whole grains. Dark chocolate are not the foods that make up the bulk of most people's diets. The foods that dominate modern eating, processed grains, refined sugars, fast food, packaged snacks, are almost entirely stripped of magnesium during processing. The third reason is the lifestyle factors we've already discussed. Diuretics like caffeine and alcohol that increase magnesium excretion, low-sodium diets that cause renal magnesium wasting, high stress that triggers magnesium loss, and gut issues that reduce absorption. Put all of that together, and you have a population that is consuming less magnesium than ever from food, absorbing less of what they consume due to gut issues, and losing more of what they absorb due to stress, medications, and dietary patterns. The result is that estimates suggest somewhere between 50% and 80% of adults in Western countries are not getting adequate magnesium. That is not a small minority. That is the majority of people, and most of those people have no idea because magnesium deficiency doesn't show up on standard blood tests. A regular blood test measures magnesium in the serum, the liquid part of the blood. But only about 1% of the body's magnesium is in the blood. The vast majority is inside cells and in bones. So your serum magnesium can appear normal while your cellular magnesium is genuinely depleted. You can be functionally deficient with a normal blood test result, which is why most doctors miss it and why most people never know. Let's also talk about magnesium and sleep, because the relationship here is more important than most people realize. And poor sleep is one of the most powerful drivers of insulin resistance that exists. When you sleep poorly, when you get fewer than 7 hours, or when your sleep is fragmented and shallow, your body's insulin sensitivity drops significantly, sometimes by as much as 30% after just a few nights. That's enormous. Your body's ability to handle glucose is dramatically impaired by poor sleep. Blood sugar becomes harder to regulate. Cravings for high-calorie foods increase, and the hormonal signals that normally tell you when you're full stop working properly. Magnesium is directly involved in the quality of sleep in several ways. It activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and recovery system, and helps quiet the fight-or-flight response that keeps people lying awake with racing thoughts. It regulates the activity of GABA, a brain chemical that is fundamentally involved in calming nervous system activity and promoting deep, restful sleep. And it influences the production of melatonin, the hormone that sets your sleep-wake cycle. When magnesium is low, GABA activity drops. The parasympathetic system can't fully engage. The stress response stays partially activated even at night. Cortisol doesn't drop as fully as it should, and the result is sleep that feels lighter, less restorative, easier to disrupt. People wake at 2 a.m. and can't get back to sleep. People feel like they dreamed all night and never went deep. People wake up already tired before the day has even started. And then that poor sleep makes insulin resistance worse the next day, which causes blood sugar fluctuations, which stress the body, which disrupts sleep again the following night. It becomes a cycle that's very hard to break when you don't address the underlying mineral deficiency driving it. One of the most commonly reported experiences when people restore their magnesium, especially when they take it in the evening, is improved sleep quality. Deeper sleep, easier time falling asleep, waking up feeling more rested, and from that improved sleep, the next day's blood sugar regulation tends to be better. Energy is more stable, cravings are less intense, the positive effects compound. Now, I want to spend some time talking about a population that is particularly vulnerable to magnesium deficiency and its metabolic consequences, and that's people who have been dieting for a long time. Chronic dieters, people who have spent years cutting calories, going through cycles of restriction and weight regain, trying different dietary approaches. Long-term caloric restriction depletes magnesium. Very low-calorie diets provide less magnesium from food. The metabolic stress of chronic restriction increases cortisol, which, as we discussed, increases magnesium excretion, and the restriction and regain cycle creates a pattern of chronic stress that keeps the cortisol-magnesium depletion loop active almost continuously. There's also something worth understanding about how the body responds to chronic restriction. When you restrict calories for an extended period, the body adapts by becoming more metabolically efficient, meaning it gets better at storing energy and more resistant to burning it. This adaptation involves changes in insulin signaling, changes in thyroid function, and changes in muscle tissue that collectively make it harder to lose weight and easier to gain it. And magnesium is involved in several of these adaptive processes. People who have dieted for years often find that they need fewer and fewer calories to maintain their weight, and that even moderate amounts of carbohydrates cause significant weight gain or blood sugar issues. This is not a personal failing. This is a physiological adaptation to chronic restriction, and restoring the mineral balance, including magnesium, is often one of the first steps toward helping the body trust that it's not in a state of deprivation, which is what allows the metabolic rate to gradually normalize. Let me also touch on something that is particularly relevant for older adults, because the relationship between magnesium and aging is significant and worth understanding. As we age, several things change in how the body manages magnesium. The gut becomes less efficient at absorbing it. The kidneys become less efficient at retaining it. Older adults tend to eat less overall, which reduces dietary intake. And many medications commonly prescribed to older adults, diuretics for blood pressure, proton pump inhibitors for reflux, certain antibiotics, further deplete magnesium. At the same time, the consequences of magnesium deficiency become more significant with age. Bone density is affected because magnesium is essential for calcium metabolism and bone formation. Cardiovascular risk increases because magnesium is critical for maintaining healthy blood pressure and heart rhythm. Cognitive function declines more rapidly because magnesium plays a key role in the signaling between brain cells. And insulin resistance tends to worsen because the entire pancreatic and cellular signaling system that magnesium supports becomes less robust with age. This means that for older adults, ensuring adequate magnesium is not just about metabolic health, it's about maintaining function across multiple systems simultaneously. And given that deficiency is so common and so underdiagnosed in this population, it's one of the most impactful and underutilized interventions available. Now, let me talk about what choosing the right form of magnesium actually means. Because not all magnesium supplements are created equal, and taking the wrong form can mean getting very little benefit while experiencing uncomfortable side effects. The most important thing to understand is that magnesium supplements come in different chemical forms, magnesium bound to different molecules, and these forms vary significantly in how well they're absorbed and how they affect the body. Magnesium oxide is the most common and least expensive form. It's what you'll find in many drugstore multivitamins and cheap supplements. It has very low absorption. Studies suggest only about 4% of the magnesium and magnesium oxide actually makes it into the bloodstream. The rest passes through the gut, which is why it has a strong laxative effect. If you've tried magnesium before and experienced significant digestive issues, there's a good chance this is the form you are taking. Magnesium glycinate is bound to glycine, an amino acid. It absorbs much more efficiently than oxide, and it's very gentle on the digestive system. Glycine itself also has calming properties, which makes magnesium glycinate particularly useful for people dealing with sleep issues, anxiety, or stress-related symptoms. This is one of the most commonly recommended forms for general metabolic and neurological support. Magnesium malate is bound to malic acid, which is involved in the same energy production pathways we discussed earlier, the ones that depend on magnesium to function. This form tends to be particularly effective for people dealing with fatigue because you're getting the magnesium and the malic acid simultaneously, both of which support energy production. Some people find it slightly more energizing than glycinate, which can be useful during the day, but less ideal if you're taking it right before bed. Magnesium 308 is a newer form that has shown promising research for crossing the blood-brain barrier, meaning it gets into the brain more effectively than other forms. The research on its specific benefits for cognitive function and brain health is early but interesting. It tends to be the most expensive option. Magnesium citrate is another well-absorbed form that is widely available. Yes, it has a mild laxative effect, not as strong as oxide, which some people find helpful if they have constipation, but it's worth being aware of if that's not something you need. For most people starting out, magnesium glycinate or magnesium malate are the most practical starting points. They absorb well, they're tolerated easily, and they're widely available at a reasonable cost. starting with 200 to 300 milligrams daily and gradually increasing to 400 milligrams, gives your digestive system time to adjust and lets you observe how your body responds. And I want to emphasize something I mentioned earlier. Timing matters. Taking magnesium in the evening, 2 to 3 hours before bed, tends to produce the most noticeable improvements in sleep quality. Some people split their dose, part in the morning and part in the evening, especially if they're taking higher amounts or if they want the metabolic benefits throughout the day as well as the sleep benefits at night. Now, let me talk about something that gives people a lot of hope, and that's the timeline of improvement. Because one of the questions I get most often is, how long does it take to notice a difference? The honest answer is that it varies, and the variation depends on how depleted you are when you start, whether you're also addressing sodium and potassium, how consistent you are with supplementation, and what other factors in your lifestyle are influencing magnesium status. That said, some improvements tend to come relatively quickly. Sleep quality often improves within 1 to 2 weeks, the kind of deep restorative sleep that leaves you feeling genuinely rested in the morning. Muscle cramps and tension, particularly the kind that wakes people up at night, often resolve within a similar time frame. Morning blood sugar can begin to show improvement within 2 to 4 weeks, though this depends significantly on the starting point and the overall context. Energy. The stable, consistent energy that doesn't spike and crash tends to take longer because the ATP pathways take time to normalize. The cellular systems that have been operating in a suboptimal state need time to rebuild and regulate. Most people report meaningful improvements in energy within 4 to 8 weeks of consistent supplementation, not overnight, but not as long as people fear. The improvements in insulin sensitivity that show up in blood tests, fasting insulin, hemoglobin A1C, fasting glucose tend to take longer. Still, these markers reflect patterns over weeks and months, but the studies showing 47% and 71% reductions in risk of insulin resistance were measured over longer periods. The biology works, but it works on the body's timeline, not ours. The most important thing is consistency. Sporadic supplementation doesn't build and maintain the magnesium stores the body needs. Daily intake, regular, consistent over months, is what creates lasting change. And that's the same commitment required for any meaningful health intervention. There's no shortcut, but there is a clear path. And now you understand it in a way that most people never will. So here's what I want you to take away from everything we've covered today. Insulin resistance is not a simple problem. It's not just about eating too many carbs. It's not just about being overweight or not exercising enough. It's about a system, a complex interconnected system of hormones, minerals, cellular receptors, electrical signals, gut function, stress responses, and sleep quality that has gotten out of balance. And magnesium sits at the center of that system in a way that nothing else does. It activates the pathways that allow insulin to work. It stabilizes the pancreatic signaling that controls when and how much insulin is released. It powers the cellular energy machinery that converts glucose into something the body can actually use. It enables vitamin D to activate and do its job. It regulates the stress response so that cortisol doesn't chronically undermine your blood sugar. And it does all of this while being depleted by the exact lifestyle choices that people make when they are trying to get healthier. When you restore magnesium properly, consistently, and in the context of a balanced mineral system, things start to align, energy becomes more stable, sleep becomes deeper, blood sugar becomes more predictable, the crashes smooth out, the morning numbers come down, and over time, the risk of progression toward type 2 diabetes and serious metabolic disease begins to fall. Not because a single supplement fixed everything, but because the foundation that everything else depends on finally given what it needed. Here is your challenge for the next 30 days. Choose a high-quality form of magnesium, glycinate or malate as your starting point. Take 300 to 400 milligrams daily consistently. Take it in the evening to support sleep. Pay attention to your energy across the day. Pay attention to how you feel after meals. Pay attention to how you sleep and how you wake up. Don't make a dozen other changes at the same time. Just give this one thing a fair, consistent trial. And keep a simple note of what you observe because the changes tend to be gradual enough that they're easy to miss day to day. But But when you look back after 30 days, many people are surprised by how much has actually shifted. And while you're doing that, look at your diet and ask whether you're getting adequate potassium found in foods like avocados, bananas, sweet potatoes, beans, and leafy greens. And if you're on a very low sodium diet, reconsider whether that's serving you as well as you think it is. Because sodium at appropriate levels is not the enemy it's been made out to be. And its role in supporting magnesium retention is real and significant. Your body is not broken. It hasn't failed you. It is responding exactly the way a biological system responds when it's operating without the resources it needs. And when you provide those resources consistently, patiently, intelligently, your body has a remarkable capacity to restore itself faster than most people expect, and in ways that compound over time. You now understand something about your own biology that most people, including many in healthcare, have never connected. Use it. If you want a complete step-by-step system for improving metabolism, stabilizing energy, and taking control of your long-term health, I've put together a comprehensive longevity guide that takes everything we talked about today and turns it into something you can actually follow day by day. It's in the description below. And if this kind of thorough, honest, science-grounded breakdown is what you're looking for, please consider subscribing. There is a lot more to cover, and I'll see you in the next one.